in the deepest, darkest corners of our planet's oceans, where sunlight has never touched the seafloor and pressure could crush a human body in milliseconds, lie the silent sentinels of maritime tragedy. Steel tombs rest in eternal darkness, their hulls cracked and corroded by decades or centuries of salt water, holding within them the final moments of brave souls who ventured into the abyss and never returned. These are the lost submarines of our world's waters, vessels that once prowled the depths with purpose and power, now reduced to ghostly monuments in underwater graveyards that few will ever witness. Welcome to OCEANIC Sleep Mysteries, where we dive deep into the most captivating stories the ocean has to offer. If you're fascinated by maritime mysteries and the secrets hidden beneath the waves, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell to join our community of deep-sea explorers. Let's embark on this haunting journey together through the depths of naval history. Tonight, we'll descend into the crushing depths where these metal leviathans rest in perpetual silence. We'll explore the tragic stories of nuclear submarines that vanished without a trace during the Cold War, discover the final resting places of German U-boats from the World Wars, and uncover the ongoing mysteries that continue to baffle maritime archaeologists and naval historians today. Historians today. Each vessel tells a story of technological ambition, human courage, strategic warfare, and ultimately, the ocean's unforgiving nature. The ocean floor is littered with more submarines than most people could ever imagine. From the shallow coastal waters where early experimental vessels met their fate, to the abyssal plains thousands of meters below the surface where modern nuclear submarines lie broken and radioactive, these underwater graveyards represent some of the most dangerous and mysterious sights on our planet. Some were lost to enemy action during wartime, others to mechanical failure or human error during peacetime operations, and a few simply vanished into the blue, their fate unknown to this day. As we journey through these tales of maritime mystery, imagine yourself floating in the eternal darkness of the deep ocean, where the only sounds are the gentle creaking of metal under pressure and the distant calls of deep-sea creatures. The water is crystal clear, but impenetrable black, and in the beam of a deep-sea submersible's lights, the outline of a submarine emerges from the gloom like a sleeping giant. Barnacles and marine growth cover surfaces that once gleamed with naval pride, and through broken portholes and twisted hull plates, the ocean has claimed every compartment, every corridor, every space where sailors once lived and worked. These stories span more than a century of submarine warfare and exploration, from the primitive diving boats of World War I to the sophisticated nuclear vessels of the modern era. Each represents not just a loss of military hardware, but a human tragedy that sent ripples of grief through families and communities around the world. The men who served aboard these vessels, for they were almost exclusively men during most of submarine history, were pioneers in one of the most dangerous forms of military service ever devised. The technology that allows us to explore these underwater graveyards has advanced dramatically in recent decades. Deep-sea submersibles, equipped with high-definition cameras and robotic arms, can now reach depths that would have been impossible to explore just 50 years ago. Marine archaeologists work alongside naval historians and engineering experts to document these sites, not just as historical curiosities, but as underwater memorials that deserve respect and protection. On a calm April morning in 1963, the USS Thresher, one of America's most advanced nuclear attack submarines, slipped beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of New Hampshire for what should have been a routine deep diving test. The Thresher represented the pinnacle of Cold War submarine technology, a sleek, 279-foot nuclear-powered hunter designed to track and destroy Soviet submarines in the event of global conflict. Her hull was built to withstand pressures that would implode conventional submarines, and her sonar systems could detect enemy vessels from distances measured in miles rather than yards. The submarine's crew of 129 men, including 17 civilian technicians from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, had confidence in their vessel's capabilities. The Thresher had recently completed an extensive overhaul with upgrades to her nuclear reactor systems and improvements to her already formidable sonar and weapons systems. Captain John Wesley Harvey, an experienced submariner with over 2 decades of naval service, commanded the vessel with the quiet professionalism that characterized the elite submarine service. As the Thresher descended toward her test depth of 1,300 feet, everything appeared normal. Radio communications with the surface support ship USS Skylark continued at regular intervals with routine reports of the submarine's status and depth. The nuclear reactor hummed with controlled power, providing the electricity and propulsion that made modern submarine operations possible. In the control room, sonar operators monitored the acoustic environment while engineering personnel kept careful watch on the complex systems that maintained life support in the underwater environment. But somewhere in the crushing darkness below the surface, something went catastrophically wrong. At approximately 9:17 a.m., the Skylark received a garbled transmission from the Thresher, something about experiencing minor difficulties and attempting to blow ballast tanks. These would be the last coherent words ever received from the submarine. Over the following minutes, increasingly desperate attempts to establish communication met only with silence, broken occasionally by the sound of compressed air and what acoustic experts later described as the sounds of a submarine breaking apart under extreme pressure. The search for the US Thresher began immediately, with every available naval vessel converging on the area where she was last known to be diving. For days, ships crisscrossed the search area using sonar and underwater detection equipment, hoping against hope to locate the missing submarine. The families of the 129 men aboard maintained vigil, clinging to the possibility that their loved ones might be trapped on the bottom in air-filled compartments, waiting for rescue. It took months of searching with the most advanced deep-sea equipment available at the time before the wreckage of the USS Thresher was finally located. She lay scattered across the ocean floor at a depth of 8,400 feet, far deeper than her test depth, broken into thousands of pieces by the incredible pressure of the deep ocean. The submarine had imploded so completely that the largest recognizable piece was no bigger than a small automobile. The nuclear reactor, designed to withstand almost any conceivable accident, had been crushed like an aluminum can. Investigation into the disaster revealed a complex chain of events that led to the submarine's loss. A silver braze joint in the engine room had failed, allowing seawater to flood into the submarine's engineering spaces. As the crew attempted to emergency blow their ballast tanks to surface, ice crystals formed in the high-pressure air lines, blocking the flow of compressed air that would have forced water out of the ballast tanks and brought the submarine to the surface. Unable to arrest their descent, the Thresher passed her crush depth and was destroyed by the immense pressure of the deep ocean. The loss of the USS Thresher led to the most comprehensive submarine safety program in naval history. The SubSafe program implemented rigorous testing and certification procedures for all submarine systems, particularly those involving hull integrity and emergency ballast tank operation. Every submarine system that could potentially affect the vessel's ability to surface was subjected to exhaustive testing and regular recertification. The program has been credited with preventing similar disasters in the decades since the Thresher's loss. Today, the wreckage site of the USS Thresher is protected as a naval memorial and underwater archaeological site. The crushing depth makes exploration extremely difficult and dangerous, but remotely operated vehicles have captured haunting images of the scattered debris field. Personal effects of the crew occasionally become visible in the submarine's remains: a coffee cup, a wrench, fragments of clothing, tangible reminders of the human cost of submarine service. The families of the Thresher's crew established memorial foundations that continue to honor the memory of those lost and support submarine safety research. Annual memorial services are held to remember not just the 129 men who died aboard the Thresher, but all submariners who have given their lives in service to their nations. The submarine service motto, "To persevere and to overcome," takes on special meaning when considering the risks that submarine crews face every time they submerge. The USS Scorpion was returning home from a Mediterranean deployment, in May 1968, when she simply vanished from the face of the Earth. Unlike the USS Thresher, whose loss occurred during a test dive with surface support nearby, the Scorpion disappeared somewhere in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from land, carrying her crew of 99 men into a mystery that remains only partially solved more than 5 decades later. The Scorpion was a skipjack-class nuclear attack submarine, smaller and older than the ill-fated Thresher, but still a formidable underwater combatant. She had been conducting intelligence-gathering operations in the Mediterranean, shadowing Soviet naval vessels and monitoring their activities during the height of the Cold War. These operations, conducted in absolute secrecy, were part of a dangerous game of underwater cat and mouse between American and Soviet submarine forces that could have triggered a nuclear conflict if things had gone wrong. Lieutenant Commander Francis Slattery commanded the Scorpion with distinction, leading a crew of experienced submariners who had served together through multiple deployments. The submarine's last confirmed position was approximately 400 miles southwest of the Azores Islands, where she had surfaced briefly to transmit routine communications to naval headquarters. After submerging to continue her journey home to Norfolk Naval Base, the Scorpion was never heard from again. When the submarine failed to arrive at her scheduled time, the Navy initially assumed she was experiencing minor mechanical problems or communication equipment failures. Submarines routinely operated under radio silence for extended periods, and delays in scheduled arrivals were not uncommon. But as hours stretched into days with no word from the Scorpion, concern grew into alarm, and alarm into the grim realization that another nuclear submarine had been lost. The search for the USS Scorpion was even more challenging than the hunt for the Thresher. While the Thresher had been lost in a known location during a scheduled test dive, the Scorpion could have been anywhere along hundreds of miles of her planned route home. The Atlantic Ocean covers more than 40 million square miles, and a submarine on the bottom would be virtually invisible to surface ships equipped with 1960s-era sonar technology. The Navy deployed dozens of ships and aircraft in the search effort, using every available piece of detection equipment to scan the ocean floor along the Scorpion's projected path. Hydrophone listening stations around the Atlantic were analyzed for any acoustic signatures that might indicate an underwater explosion or implosion. Mathematical models were created to predict where debris might surface based on ocean currents and wind patterns. After months of intensive searching, the wreckage of the USS Scorpion was finally located by the deep-sea research vessel Trieste-2 at a depth of more than 11,000 feet. The submarine lay on the bottom of an underwater mountain range, broken into several large sections, but more intact than the completely destroyed Thresher. The hull had been twisted and crushed by implosion, but much of the submarine's basic structure remained recognizable. The photographic surveys of the wreckage revealed disturbing details about the submarine's final moments. The Scorpion appeared to have suffered an internal explosion that breached her pressure hull, followed by rapid flooding and implosion as she exceeded her crushed depth. But what had caused the initial explosion remained a matter of intense debate and investigation. Some theories focused on a torpedo malfunction, while others suggested sabotage or attack by Soviet naval forces. The Cold War context of the Scorpion's loss added layers of complexity and secrecy to the investigation. Intelligence operations conducted by American submarines in Soviet waters were highly classified, and the possibility that the Scorpion had been sunk by enemy action could not be publicly acknowledged without revealing sensitive information about submarine warfare tactics. Official Navy findings concluded that the submarine was lost due to an accidental torpedo explosion, but alternative theories continue to circulate among submarine veterans and naval historians. One of the most persistent theories suggests that the Scorpion was destroyed by a Soviet submarine in retaliation for the earlier loss of a Soviet nuclear submarine, the K-129, which had exploded and sunk in the Pacific Ocean earlier in 1968. According to this theory, The loss of both submarines was part of a secret submarine war between the superpowers that never became public knowledge. The timing and circumstances of both losses, along with unusual Soviet naval activity in the Atlantic during the period, lend some credibility to this hypothesis. Submarines. Examination of the Scorpion's wreckage by deep-sea submersibles in subsequent years has provided additional clues about her final moments, but also raised new questions. The condition of certain hull sections suggests that the submarine may have experienced multiple catastrophic events in rapid succession. Torpedo storage areas show signs of severe damage consistent with an internal explosion, but the exact sequence of events that led to the submarine's destruction remains unclear. The families of the Scorpion's crew have never received definitive answers about what happened to their loved ones. Memorial services honor the 99 men who died aboard the submarine, but questions about the circumstances of their deaths continue to haunt their survivors. The official Navy position maintains that the loss was accidental, but classified documents related to the incident remain sealed, fueling ongoing speculation about hidden aspects of the tragedy. In the dark waters of the North Pacific, more than 3 miles beneath the surface, lies one of the most significant submarine wrecks of the Cold War era. The Soviet nuclear submarine K-129, a Gulf-class ballistic missile submarine carrying nuclear warheads, exploded and sank in March 1968, taking all 98 crew members to their deaths in one of the most mysterious submarine disasters of the nuclear age. What makes this tragedy even more remarkable is the extraordinary effort by American intelligence agencies to recover the submarine and its nuclear secrets from the deepest ocean depths. The K-129 was no ordinary submarine. As a strategic ballistic missile submarine, she carried nuclear-tipped missiles capable of striking targets on the American West Coast from patrol areas in the North Pacific. During the height of the Cold War, these submarines represented one half of the Soviet Union's nuclear deterrent, along with land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers. The submarine's mission was to remain hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean, ready to launch nuclear strikes if ordered to do so by Soviet leadership. Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar commanded the K-129 and her crew of experienced Soviet naval personnel. The submarine had been on patrol for several weeks, operating under strict radio silence in international waters northwest of Hawaii. Soviet ballistic missile submarines routinely conducted these patrols, which could last for months, maintaining the nuclear balance that kept both superpowers in a state of tense equilibrium during the Cold War. On the night of March 8, 1968, something went catastrophically wrong aboard the K-129. American hydrophone stations monitoring underwater sounds across the Pacific recorded a brief but intense acoustic signature consistent with an underwater explosion. The sound was analyzed and triangulated to a position approximately 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, in waters more than 16,000 feet deep. The explosion was powerful enough to be detected thousands of miles away, suggesting a catastrophic failure involving the submarine's nuclear reactor or ballistic missiles. The Soviet Navy immediately began searching for their missing submarine, but they were looking in the wrong area. Soviet navigation systems had placed the K-129 several hundred miles from her actual position when she was destroyed, and the search effort focused on areas where the submarine could not possibly be found. After weeks of intensive searching with surface ships and aircraft, Soviet authorities were forced to conclude that the K-129 and her crew had been lost with all hands. Meanwhile, American intelligence agencies had used their superior hydrophone network to pinpoint the location of the K-129's wreckage with remarkable accuracy. The opportunity to examine a Soviet nuclear submarine carrying ballistic missiles and nuclear warheads was too valuable to pass up, but recovering a submarine from a depth of more than 3 miles presented technical challenges that had never been attempted before. The deepest salvage operations in history had recovered objects from depths measured in hundreds of feet, not thousands. the Central Intelligence Agency launched one of the most ambitious and expensive covert operations of the Cold War to recover the K-129. Project Azorian, as it became known, involved the construction of a massive deep-sea recovery vessel disguised as a commercial mining ship. The Hughes-Glummer Explorer, ostensibly built by Howard Hughes to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor, was actually designed to lift the entire Soviet submarine from the ocean depths using a giant mechanical claw. The engineering challenges of Project Azorian were staggering. Azorian. The recovery system had to operate at crushing depths where the pressure exceeded 500 times that at sea level in total darkness and with precise enough control to grasp a submarine that had been broken into pieces by the force of implosion. The mechanical systems had to be strong enough to lift thousands of tons of submarine and seawater while remaining secret enough to avoid detection by Soviet intelligence services. In the summer of 1974, 6 years after the K-129 sinking, the Hughes-Glummer Explorer arrived at the wreck site and began recovery operations. Using a massive mechanical claw lowered on cables more than 3 miles long, the recovery team attempted to grasp the submarine's hull and lift it to the surface. The operation was conducted under the cover story of deep-sea mining, with Soviet naval vessels monitoring the activities but apparently believing the deception. The recovery operation was only partially successful. As the submarine was being lifted toward the surface, structural failures caused approximately 2/3 of the hull to break away and fall back to the ocean floor. The section that was successfully recovered included the forward part of the submarine, containing the crew quarters, some electronics, and most importantly, 2 nuclear torpedoes and cryptographic equipment that provided valuable intelligence about Soviet naval capabilities. The recovered portion of the K-129 also contained the remains of 6 Soviet sailors, who were buried at sea with full military honors in a ceremony filmed by the CIA. The footage of this burial, showing American naval personnel paying their respects to Soviet submariners, was eventually provided to the Russian government as a gesture of recognition for their service. The ceremony highlighted the shared dangers faced by submariners of all nations, regardless of political differences. Investigation of the recovered sections revealed important information about the cause of the K-129's destruction. Evidence suggested that the submarine had been destroyed by an explosion in the forward ballistic missile compartment, possibly triggered by a malfunction in one of the nuclear-tipped missiles or by the accidental mixing of missile fuel and oxidizer. The explosion had been powerful enough to breach the submarine's pressure hull instantly, causing catastrophic flooding and implosion. The K-129 incident highlighted the extreme dangers faced by crews of nuclear submarines during the Cold War. Operating nuclear reactors and ballistic missiles in the confined space of a submarine required constant vigilance and perfect execution of complex procedures. A single mistake or mechanical failure could destroy the vessel and kill everyone aboard in a matter of seconds. The psychological pressure of operating weapons of mass destruction while submerged for months at a time took a severe toll on submarine crews. Today, the remaining sections of the K-129 continue to rest on the Pacific Ocean floor, slowly being covered by sediment and colonized by deep-sea organisms. The submarine has become an artificial reef in the abyssal depths, providing habitat for creatures that have never seen sunlight. Marine archaeologists studying the wreck site have documented how the ocean environment gradually reclaims human artifacts with corrosion and marine growth, slowly erasing the evidence of the tragedy that occurred more than 5 decades ago. Scattered across the ocean floors of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean seas lie the remnants of what was once the most feared submarine force in history. The German U-boats of World War I and World War II terrorized Allied shipping for decades, sinking thousands of merchant vessels and warships in their quest to strangle the supply lines that kept Britain and other Allied nations in the fight. Today, these underwater wolves rest in steel silence, their hulls slowly dissolving in salt water, their stories preserved only in historical records and the memories of those who survived their attacks. The development of German submarine warfare began in earnest during World War I, when the Imperial German Navy recognized that their surface fleet could not match the might of the British Royal Navy in direct confrontation. Submarines offered a way to strike at British commerce without exposing valuable surface ships to destruction. The early U-boats were primitive by later standards, small, cramped vessels that could barely submerge for a few hours at a time, and relied on diesel engines for surface propulsion and battery-powered electric motors when underwater. U-20, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Walter Schwieger, became one of the most infamous submarines in history when she torpedoed the passenger liner RMS Lusitania off the coast of Ireland in May 1915. The sinking of the Lusitania, with the loss of nearly 200 passengers and crew, including 128 Americans, shocked the world and helped turn public opinion against Germany. The U-20 herself would survive the war, only to be wrecked on the Danish coast in 1916 while attempting to avoid British naval patrols. 12. By the end of World War I, German U-boats had sunk over 5,000 Allied ships, totaling more than 12 million tons of shipping. The campaign came close to starving Britain into submission, demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of submarine warfare against merchant shipping. However, the development of convoy systems, improved anti-submarine weapons, and better detection methods gradually turned the tide against the U-boats. Of the 373 German submarines that participated in World War I, 178 were lost, with most of their crews. The interwar period saw dramatic improvements in submarine technology, and when World War II began, the German Kriegsmarine possessed some of the most advanced submarines in the world. The Type 7 and Type 9 U-boats that formed the backbone of the German submarine fleet were larger, faster, and more capable than their World War I predecessors. They could remain submerged for extended periods and had sufficient range to operate across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine force, developed the wolf pack tactic that would make U-boats the terror of Allied shipping. Instead of operating alone, submarines would coordinate their attacks on Allied convoys, with multiple U-boats striking simultaneously to overwhelm the escort vessels. These coordinated attacks required careful planning and communication between submarines, often conducted while surfaced at night when the submarines were difficult to detect visually. The Battle of the Atlantic, as the submarine campaign of World War II became known, raged for nearly 6 years and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. German U-boats sank over 3,500 Allied merchant ships and 175 warships, while the Allies destroyed 783 German submarines. The casualty rate among U-boat crews was staggering. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served on German submarines during the war, 28,000 never returned home. This represented a loss rate of 70%, making submarine service one of the most dangerous military occupations of the war. U-505, now preserved as a museum exhibit in Chicago, provides a rare opportunity to examine a World War II German submarine that survived the war intact. Captured by the US Navy in June 1944, the capture operation, conducted by aircraft and surface ships of a hunter-killer group, demonstrated how Allied anti-submarine warfare had evolved to turn the hunters into the hunted. Many U-boats met their fate in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, where the battle for control of the sea lanes was most intense. The wrecks of these submarines lie scattered across the ocean floor from the American coast to the approaches to Britain. Some were sunk by depth charges dropped by escort vessels, their hulls crushed by underwater explosions that drove them to depths far beyond their design limits. Others fell victim to aircraft attacks, bombed while running on the surface to recharge their batteries or attack convoys. U-166, sunk in the Gulf of Mexico in August 1942, represents one of the most historically significant U-boat discoveries of recent years. The submarine was located in 2001 by oil industry remotely operated vehicles, lying at a depth of 5,000 feet. The discovery provided the first clear evidence of German submarine operations in American coastal waters and helped solve a 60-year-old mystery about the submarine's fate. Investigation of the wreck confirmed that U-166 had been sunk by depth charges from a US Coast Guard aircraft while attacking an Allied convoy. The technological evolution of German submarines during World War II was remarkable, driven by the desperate need to maintain effectiveness against increasingly sophisticated Allied countermeasures. The Type N1 submarines, introduced near the end of the war, represented a revolutionary advance in submarine design. These boats could remain submerged for extended periods using new battery technology and streamlined hull designs that allowed much higher underwater speeds than previous submarines. Unfortunately for their crews, most of these advanced submarines were lost before they could significantly impact the war's outcome. U-2511, one of the most advanced type Etiquette Penti-1 boats, conducted a single war patrol before Germany's surrender. WWII. The submarine's commander later claimed that he had tracked and could have sunk a British cruiser in the final days of the war, but chose not to attack because of the impending ceasefire. The U-2511 surrendered to Allied forces and was later scuttled, taking her advanced technology to the ocean floor. It's the stop. The psychological toll of submarine warfare on both sides was immense. U-boat crews lived in cramped, dangerous conditions for months at a time, never knowing when their boat might be detected and attacked. The knowledge that their submarine was surrounded by thousands of tons of crushing water, held back only by a steel hull that could be breached by a single well-placed depth charge, created constant stress that affected every aspect of life aboard the boat. Allied merchant sailors faced similar psychological pressures, sailing across oceans where enemy submarines could strike without warning. The sight of a torpedo wake heading toward their ship, or the sound of an underwater explosion that meant another vessel in their convoy had been hit, created trauma that many sailors carried for the rest of their lives. The Battle of the Atlantic was as much a psychological war as a physical one, with each side attempting to break the will of the other through sustained campaigns of destruction. Today, the wrecks of German U-boats serve as underwater museums and memorials to the men who served and died aboard them. Marine archaeologists have documented dozens of these wrecks, studying how the submarines were constructed and how they were destroyed. The cold, oxygen-poor environment of the deep ocean has preserved many U-boats in remarkable condition, with personal effects of the crew still visible inside the hulls. Some U-boat wrecks have become artificial reefs, providing habitat for marine life in areas of the ocean floor that would otherwise be barren. Fish and other sea creatures shelter in the submarine's compartments, while coral and other marine organisms slowly colonize the steel structures. This transformation from instruments of war to havens for marine life represents a form of natural healing as the ocean gradually reclaims these monuments to human conflict. On April 16, 1951, HMS Affray, a modern British A-class submarine, departed from Portsmouth Naval Base on what should have been a routine training exercise in the English Channel. The submarine carried 75 men, her regular crew of 61 officers and ratings, plus 14 additional personnel, including Royal Marine Commandos, who were practicing submarine operations. None of these men would ever return home, as the HMS Affray became one of the most tragic peacetime submarine losses in Royal Navy history, sparking the largest submarine search and rescue operation ever conducted by British forces. The HMS Affray represented the cutting edge of post-World War II British submarine technology. Commissioned in 1946, she was one of the new A-class submarines designed to incorporate lessons learned during the war, with improved underwater performance, better sonar systems, and enhanced crew accommodations. At 281 feet in length and displacing 1,385 tons when submerged, the Affray was larger and more capable than the wartime submarines that had served with distinction during the recent conflict. Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn commanded HMS Affray with the confidence and experience typical of Royal Navy submarine officers. The submarine's mission was to conduct a simulated attack on surface vessels, followed by training exercises with the embarked Royal Marines. These operations were considered routine, conducted regularly to maintain the readiness of both submarine crews and the Special Forces personnel who might need to be transported covertly by submarine during future conflicts. The last communication from HMS Affray was received at 8:56 p.m. on April 16, when the submarine transmitted a routine position report indicating she was diving to begin her exercise. Radio operators at naval communication stations waited for the next scheduled transmission, but it never came. As hours passed without word from the submarine, concern grew among naval authorities. By the morning of April 17, it was clear that something had gone seriously wrong with HMS Affray. The Royal Navy immediately launched the largest search and rescue operation in its history, deploying dozens of ships and aircraft to scour the English Channel for any sign of the missing submarine. The relatively shallow waters of the Channel, rarely deeper than 200 feet in most areas, should have made locating the submarine a straightforward task. But the strong tidal currents, numerous wrecks from 2 world wars, and soft sediment on the bottom created a complex underwater environment that challenged even the most sophisticated search equipment available in 1951. Rescue ships equipped with underwater telephone systems attempted to make contact with survivors who might be trapped in air-filled compartments aboard the submarine. The haunting calls of "Hi HMS Affray, can you hear me?" echoed through the underwater darkness, but they met only silence. Deep-sea divers were prepared to descend to the submarine if she was located in shallow enough water, but first the search teams had to find her among the many sonar contacts scattered across the Channel floor. The search operation captured the attention of the British public and international media as families of the missing submariners maintained vigil while hoping for news of their loved ones. The Royal Navy's submarine rescue procedures, developed during World War II, assumed that submarines lost in coastal waters could be located and reached by divers within hours of their disappearance. The prolonged search for HMS Affray revealed significant gaps in these procedures and highlighted the need for improved underwater search capabilities. After 64 days of intensive searching, HMS Affray was finally located by the submarine HMS Reclaim using improved sonar equipment. The submarine lay on the bottom at a depth of 278 feet, well beyond the reach of the diving equipment available at the time. Her hull appeared to be intact from the surface, raising hopes that some crew members might have survived in air-filled compartments, but the depth made immediate rescue impossible. When Royal Navy divers finally reached HMS Affray using experimental deep diving equipment, they discovered that the submarine had flooded completely, with no air-filled spaces where crew members could have survived. The investigation into the cause of the disaster focused on a catastrophic failure of the submarine's snort mast, a device that allowed the submarine to run her diesel engines while remaining just below the surface. The snort mast had broken off at its base, allowing seawater to flood into the submarine through the engine room. The technical investigation revealed that the snort mast had failed due to metal fatigue, a phenomenon that was not well understood at the time. The constant stress of raising and lowering the mast, combined with the corrosive effects of seawater, had weakened the metal structure until it could no longer withstand the forces acting upon it. When the mast broke away, it left a large opening in the submarine's pressure hull that could not be sealed from inside. The flooding that followed the snort mast failure would have been rapid and catastrophic. Seawater rushing into the engine room would have quickly overwhelmed the submarine's pumping systems and emergency procedures. The crew would have had only minutes to attempt emergency surfacing before the flooding progressed beyond their ability to control. With the submarine's buoyancy lost, HMS Affray would have sunk rapidly to the bottom of the channel, taking all hands with her. The tragedy of HMS Affray led to significant improvements in Royal Navy submarine safety procedures and equipment design. Snort masts were redesigned with better materials and regular inspection requirements to prevent similar failures. Emergency escape equipment was improved to give crew members a better chance of survival if their submarine was lost in relatively shallow water. Training programs were enhanced to prepare submarine crews for a wider range of emergency scenarios. The families of HMS Affray's crew struggled with the loss of their loved ones and the knowledge that they had died so close to home during training exercise. The submarine's loss highlighted the inherent dangers of submarine service, even during routine operations in familiar waters. The men who died aboard HMS Affray had survived World War II only to be claimed by the sea during peacetime, a bitter irony that was not lost on their survivors. Memorial services for the crew of HMS Affray were held throughout Britain, with special ceremonies at naval bases where many of the men had served during their careers. The submarine service community, always close-knit due to the shared dangers of their profession, rallied around the families of the lost submariners, providing support and maintaining the memory of their sacrifice. The Royal Navy established annual memorial services that continue to honor the men of HMS Affray and other submarines lost in peacetime operations. The wreck site of HMS Affray became a protected war grave, with diving prohibited except for official Royal Navy operations. Over the years, the submarine has slowly settled into the soft sediment of the channel floor, gradually being covered by marine growth and debris washed down by the strong tidal currents. The site serves as an underwater memorial to the 75 men who died aboard the submarine, a reminder of the risks faced by those who serve beneath the sea. Modern underwater archaeology techniques have allowed researchers to study the HMS Affray wreck site without disturbing the submarine itself. High-resolution sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicle surveys have documented the condition of the wreck and the changes that have occurred over the decades since her loss. These studies contribute to our understanding of how submarines deteriorate in the marine environment and help preserve the historical record of this tragic event. On August 12, 2000, the Russian nuclear submarine Kursk was conducting naval exercises in the Barents Sea when a series of explosions tore through her hull, sending the massive vessel to the bottom with 118 men aboard. The loss of the Kursk shocked the world and marked one of the most tragic submarine disasters of the modern era, made even more heartbreaking by the revelation that some crew members survived the initial explosions and lived for hours in the flooded submarine. Writing final letters to their families while waiting for a rescue that would never come, the Kursk was no ordinary submarine. As an Oscar II-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, she was one of the largest and most powerful attack submarines ever built, measuring 505 feet in length and displacing over 24,000 tons when submerged. Armed with massive P-700 Granite anti-ship missiles capable of sinking aircraft carriers, the Kursk represented the pinnacle of Soviet submarine technology and naval engineering. Her double-hulled construction and compartmentalized design were supposed to make her virtually unsinkable. Captain Gennady Lyachin, a highly experienced submarine commander with over 2 decades of naval service, led the Kursk's crew of hand-picked officers and sailors. The submarine was participating in a major Russian naval exercise, the largest conducted by the Russian Navy since the end of the Cold War. The exercises were intended to demonstrate Russia's continued naval capabilities despite the economic difficulties that had plagued the country throughout the 1990s. At 11:28 am local time, seismic monitoring stations around the world detected the first of 2 explosions aboard the Kursk. The initial blast was relatively small, equivalent to about 100 kilograms of TNT, but it was followed 135 seconds later by a massive explosion measuring 3.5 on the Richter scale. This second explosion, equivalent to several tons of conventional explosives, was powerful enough to register on earthquake monitoring equipment thousands of miles away and created a mushroom cloud of water visible from aircraft in the area. The explosions occurred in the submarine's forward torpedo room, where the Kursk carried a mix of conventional and experimental torpedoes. Investigation would later reveal that a torpedo powered by hydrogen peroxide fuel had leaked and exploded, triggering a chain reaction that detonated other torpedoes and warheads stored in the compartment. The force of the explosions was so great that it destroyed the entire forward section of the submarine and created a hole in the seabed where the Kursk came to rest. Despite the catastrophic damage to the forward sections, the aft compartments of the Kursk remained intact and air-filled after the submarine sank to the bottom at a depth of 354 feet. 23 crew members had survived the explosions and flooding, trapped in the 9th compartment with limited emergency supplies and no way to communicate with the surface. These men, led by Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, attempted to organize their survival while hoping that rescue operations would reach them in time. The Russian Navy's initial response to the disaster was hampered by confusion, secrecy, and inadequate rescue equipment. Officials initially denied that anything serious had occurred, claiming that the Kursk was conducting routine exercises and would surface on schedule. When the submarine failed to make contact, Russian rescue vessels were dispatched to the area, but their antiquated diving equipment and rescue submersibles proved inadequate for the depth and conditions at the wreck site. International offers of assistance were initially rejected by Russian authorities, who insisted that their own rescue capabilities were sufficient to save any survivors. Precious time was lost as Russian rescue submersibles repeatedly failed to establish a proper seal with the Kursk's escape hatches, and technical problems prevented divers from reaching the submarine. The pride and secrecy that had characterized Soviet naval operations during the Cold War continued to influence Russian decision-making, even when lives hung in the balance. After several days of failed rescue attempts, the Russian government finally accepted international help. British and Norwegian rescue teams arrived with advanced diving equipment and rescue submersibles designed for deep water operations. However, when foreign divers finally gained access to the Kursk's interior, they found that all crew members had died days earlier. The survivors had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning and hypothermia while waiting for rescue. The investigation into the Kursk disaster revealed serious problems with Russian submarine safety procedures and emergency response capabilities. The experimental torpedo that caused the explosions had a history of instability and should not have been loaded aboard the submarine during exercises. The Russian Navy's rescue equipment was outdated and poorly maintained, unable to operate effectively at the relatively shallow depth where the Kursk was lost. Communication procedures between submarines and surface ships had broken down, preventing timely notification of the emergency. Personal letters written by the trapped survivors were recovered from the submarine, providing heartbreaking insights into their final hours. Captain Lieutenant Kolesnikov wrote to his wife, explaining that the crew was attempting to escape through the submarine's emergency systems, but that their situation was becoming desperate. These letters, published with the family's permission, brought home the human cost of the disaster and the anguish of the men who died knowing that their loved ones were waiting for them at home. The recovery of the Kursk herself became an international engineering project as the Russian government contracted with Dutch and other foreign companies to raise the submarine from the seabed. The operation required cutting away the destroyed forward section and installing lifting cables and buoyancy chambers to bring the massive hull to the surface. The recovery took more than a year to complete and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. When the Kursk was finally raised and brought to dry dock, forensic investigators were able to examine the wreckage in detail and recover the remains of most crew members for proper burial. The investigation confirmed that the disaster had been caused by a torpedo explosion, but questions remained about why such unstable weapons had been used during exercises and why the rescue response had been so inadequate. The families of the Kursk's crew became vocal advocates for submarine safety improvements and government accountability. They sued the Russian government for compensation and demanded answers about the failures that had led to their loved ones' deaths. The tragedy highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by submarine crews even in the modern era, when advanced technology and safety systems should have prevented such disasters. The loss of the Kursk had far-reaching implications for Russian naval operations and submarine design. New safety procedures were implemented for handling experimental weapons, and emergency response capabilities were upgraded with modern rescue equipment purchased from international suppliers. The incident also marked a turning point in Russian attitudes toward international cooperation, as the government recognized that national pride could not substitute for effective rescue capabilities. Memorial services for the Kursk's crew drew attention from around the world as the tragedy transcended national boundaries to become a shared human loss. The submarine service communities of many nations, including former Cold War adversaries, expressed their condolences and solidarity with the families of the lost submariners. The ocean, which had claimed so many submarines throughout history, had once again demonstrated that it makes no distinction between friend and enemy, ally and adversary. The First World War marked the beginning of submarine warfare on a massive scale, as nations deployed hundreds of these revolutionary vessels in the deadliest conflict the world had yet seen. But among the submarines that prowled the waters from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, many simply vanished without a trace, taking their crews into maritime mysteries that remain unsolved more than a century later. These lost submarines of the Great War represent some of the earliest and most perplexing disappearances in naval history, their fates known only to the silent depths where they rest. THMS 824, a British E-class submarine, disappeared in the North Sea in March 1916 while on patrol against German naval forces. The submarine had been operating in dangerous waters near the German coast, where enemy submarines, mines and patrol vessels created constant threats to Allied submarines. Lieutenant Commander Stanley Melville commanded E-24 and her crew of 30 officers and ratings, experienced submariners who understood the risks of operating in hostile waters during wartime. The last radio transmission from HMS E-24 indicated that she was proceeding to her assigned patrol area and expected to return to base within a week. When the submarine failed to appear at the scheduled rendezvous, search operations began immediately, but the North Sea's harsh weather and active combat operations limited the scope of the search. No trace of E-24 was ever found, and the submarine was eventually declared lost with all hands, one of 54 British submarines that would be destroyed during the war. French submarine Pluviose met a different but equally tragic fate in May 1910 during peacetime maneuvers in the English Channel. The submarine was accidentally rammed and sunk by the French steamer Pas de Calais in a collision that demonstrated the extreme vulnerability of early submarines to surface ship traffic. The Pluviose sank rapidly with her entire crew of 27 men, becoming one of the first major submarine disasters and highlighting the need for better safety procedures when submarines operated near surface vessels. The collision occurred during daylight hours in good visibility, but the submarine's low profile and the limited communication capabilities of the era contributed to the tragedy. Surface ships had no reliable method for detecting submerged submarines, and submarines had no way to warn surface vessels of their presence when running at periscope depth. The Pluviose disaster led to the development of new protocols for submarine operations in shipping lanes and improved communication systems between submarines and surface vessels. Italian submarine Medusa disappeared in the Adriatic Sea in June 1911 during a period of tension between Italy and the Ottoman Empire. The submarine had been conducting reconnaissance operations along the Albanian coast when she vanished without sending any distress signal. The Medusa's fate remained a complete mystery until her wreck was discovered by sport divers in 2007, lying at a depth of 170 feet with evidence suggesting she had been destroyed by an internal explosion. The discovery of the Medusa nearly a century after her loss provided new insights into early submarine operations and the hazards faced by pioneer submariners. The wreck showed signs of a violent explosion in the battery compartment, possibly caused by the accumulation of hydrogen gas generated by the submarine's primitive electrical systems. Early submarines lacked the sophisticated ventilation and gas monitoring systems that would later become standard equipment, making them vulnerable to explosions from various sources. Russian submarine Aquila, one of the world's largest submarines when she was completed in 1911, was lost in the Baltic Sea in November 1915 under circumstances that remain controversial. The submarine was operating against German forces when she disappeared, leading to speculation that she had been sunk by enemy action. However, some evidence suggests that Aquila may have been destroyed by a mine, as the Baltic Sea was heavily mined by both sides during the war. The loss of Aquila was particularly significant because she represented Russia's most advanced submarine technology and had been expected to play a major role in Baltic operations against the German Navy. The submarine's disappearance deprived the Russian Navy of a valuable asset at a time when effective submarines were desperately needed to counter German naval superiority in the Baltic. The exact location of Aquila's wreck has never been determined, despite numerous search efforts over the decades. German submarine UB-65 became the subject of one of the most enduring maritime ghost stories of the Great War, with crew members reporting supernatural occurrences aboard the vessel before her mysterious disappearance in July 1918. The submarine had experienced a series of accidents and unusual incidents during construction and early operations, leading to rumors that she was cursed or haunted. When UB-65 failed to return from a patrol in the English Channel, her loss was attributed to enemy action, but no Allied forces reported engaging a German submarine at the time and place of her disappearance. The technology of World War I submarines made them particularly vulnerable to a wide range of hazards that would be reduced or eliminated in later vessels. Early submarines relied on gasoline engines for surface propulsion, creating fire and explosion risks that diesel engines would later minimize. Battery systems were primitive and prone to generating toxic gases, while hull construction techniques had not yet been perfected to withstand the stresses of repeated diving and surfacing operations. Navigation and communication systems aboard World War I submarines were rudimentary compared to later standards, making it easy for submarines to become lost or separated from their bases. Radio equipment was unreliable and had limited range, while navigation depended on celestial observations that were often impossible to obtain during extended submerged operations. Many submarines probably became lost simply because they could not determine their position accurately enough to find their way home. The human factors involved in early submarine operations also contributed to the high loss rate during World War I. Submarine crews required extensive training to operate the complex and dangerous equipment aboard their vessels, but the rapid expansion of submarine forces during the war meant that many crews were inadequately prepared for the challenges they would face. The psychological stresses of submarine warfare, combined with the primitive living conditions aboard early submarines, created additional risks that could lead to fatal mistakes. Mine warfare posed an especially serious threat to submarines during World War I, as both sides laid thousands of mines in shipping lanes and naval operating areas. Early submarines lacked the sonar systems that would later allow them to detect underwater obstacles, and mine-sweeping techniques were not effective against the deep-laid mines that could destroy submerged submarines. Many submarine losses during the war were probably caused by mines, though the evidence was usually destroyed along with the vessel. The legacy of World War I submarine losses extends far beyond the individual tragedies, as these early disasters provided valuable lessons that improved submarine safety in later conflicts. Investigation of submarine accidents, when possible, led to better hull designs, improved safety systems, and more effective training programs. The men who died aboard these pioneer submarines contributed to the development of safer and more capable vessels that would serve in World War II and beyond. Today, marine archaeologists continue to search for the wrecks of World War I submarines, using advanced sonar and underwater vehicles to explore areas where these vessels might have been lost. Each discovery provides new information about early submarine technology and operations, while also serving as a memorial to the brave men who pioneered underwater warfare. The cold, dark depths where these submarines rest have preserved them as time capsules from an era when submarine warfare was in its infancy and every dive was an adventure into the unknown. In the deepest trenches and most remote corners of the world's oceans lie submarine graveyards that have never been fully explored or documented. These underwater cemeteries contain vessels from every era of submarine warfare, from primitive experimental craft of the late 19th century to sophisticated nuclear submarines of the Cold War. Many of these wrecks remain undiscovered, their locations lost to history, while others have been found but remain too deep or too dangerous to investigate thoroughly. These mysterious submarine graveyards represent some of the last unexplored frontiers on our planet. The Atlantic Ocean contains the largest concentration of submarine wrecks in the world, a legacy of 2 world wars and decades of Cold War naval operations. From the shallow waters off the American East Coast to the abyssal depths of the mid-Atlantic ridge, hundreds of submarines rest in various states of preservation. The Sargasso Sea, that mysterious region of floating seaweed and calm waters, harbors wrecks of German U-boats that ventured far from their home bases during World War II, some still containing unexploded torpedoes and other dangerous ordnance. Deep-sea exploration vessels have occasionally stumbled upon submarine wrecks during unrelated research missions, revealing vessels that were never reported as missing or whose loss had been attributed to other causes. In 2019, researchers using advanced sonar systems discovered what appeared to be a World War II-era submarine at a depth of over 12,000 feet in the Atlantic, far deeper than any known submarine loss. The vessel's identity remains unknown, and the extreme depth makes investigation extremely difficult and expensive. The Mediterranean Sea holds special significance as a submarine graveyard, having witnessed intensive submarine warfare during both world wars and serving as a testing ground for early submarine development. Italian, German, British and French submarines all conducted operations in the Mediterranean's relatively confined waters, leading to numerous encounters and losses. The sea's complex underwater topography, with deep basins separated by shallow ridges, has preserved many wrecks in excellent condition while making others nearly impossible to locate. One of the most intriguing Mediterranean mysteries involves the fate of HMS Triumph, a British submarine that disappeared near the Dardanelles in January 1915 during the Gallipoli campaign. The submarine was last seen diving to attack Turkish shipping, but she never returned to her rendezvous point. Despite decades of searching, no confirmed trace of Triumph has ever been found, though several sonar contacts in the area have raised hopes among maritime archaeologists. The rocky, current-swept waters near the Dardanelles make systematic searching extremely challenging. The Pacific Ocean's vast expanse contains submarine graveyards that may never be fully catalogued or explored. The ocean's tremendous depth and size mean that many submarine wrecks will remain undiscovered indefinitely. Japanese submarines lost during World War II are scattered across the Pacific, from the Aleutian Islands to the waters of Australia. Many in depths that exceed the capabilities of current exploration technology. Some of these submarines carried important historical documents or valuable cargo that would provide new insights into wartime operations. Soviet submarine graveyards in the Arctic Ocean present unique challenges for exploration and documentation. The harsh climate, ice cover, and extreme depths of the Arctic basin have preserved Soviet submarines in pristine condition, but also made them nearly inaccessible to researchers. Some of these submarines carried nuclear reactors and weapons that pose ongoing environmental hazards, requiring careful monitoring to prevent radioactive contamination of Arctic waters. The Barents Sea Traditional Operating Area for Soviet Northern Fleet submarines contains numerous wrecks from the Cold War era. Many of these submarines were lost during training exercises or operational patrols that were never acknowledged by Soviet authorities. The locations of some wrecks are known to Russian naval authorities but remain classified, while others have been completely lost due to poor record-keeping during the chaotic post-Soviet period. Experimental submarine graveyards represent a special category of unexplored sites, as these vessels often incorporated revolutionary but untested technologies. Many experimental submarines were lost during trials, taking their technological secrets to the bottom with them. The German Navy's Type 17 submarines, which used revolutionary hydrogen peroxide propulsion systems, suffered numerous losses during development and testing. Several of these submarines remain undiscovered, along with their advanced but dangerous propulsion systems. The discovery of submarine graveyards has been revolutionized by advances in deep-sea exploration technology. Autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with high-resolution cameras and sonar systems can now explore areas that would have been impossible to reach just a few decades ago. Side-scan sonar systems can map large areas of the ocean floor in detail, revealing the distinctive shapes of submarine hulls, even when they are partially buried in sediment or covered by marine growth. Satellite imagery and advanced computer modeling have also contributed to the search for lost submarines. Researchers can now use historical records, ocean current data, and mathematical models to predict where missing submarines might have come to rest. These techniques have led to the discovery of several previously unknown wrecks and have narrowed down search areas for submarines that have been missing for decades. The environmental impact of submarine graveyards is a growing concern as these wrecks age and deteriorate. Many submarines carried fuel, lubricants, and other hazardous materials that can leak into the marine environment as hull corrosion progresses. Nuclear submarines present particular challenges as their reactors and fuel systems require long-term monitoring to ensure that radioactive materials do not contaminate surrounding waters. Legal and ethical considerations complicate the exploration of submarine graveyards, as many wrecks are considered war graves that should not be disturbed. International maritime law provides some protection for military vessels, but enforcement is difficult in international waters. The families of submarine crews often oppose exploration activities that they view as disturbing the final resting places of their loved ones, creating tensions between scientific research and respect for the dead. Commercial salvage operations have targeted some submarine wrecks for their metal content or historical artifacts, leading to the destruction of important archaeological sites. The bronze propellers and other non-ferrous metals used in submarine construction are valuable to scrap dealers, while collectors will pay high prices for submarine artifacts. Protecting submarine graveyards from unauthorized salvage requires international cooperation and enforcement mechanisms that are often lacking. The study of submarine graveyards provides valuable insights into naval history, submarine technology, and marine archaeology. Each wreck is a time capsule that preserves the technology, tactics, and human stories of its era. The condition of submarine wrecks also helps researchers understand how metal structures deteriorate in the marine environment, information that is valuable for designing future underwater installations and protecting existing wrecks. Future exploration of submarine graveyards will likely focus on the deepest and most remote sites that have not yet been accessible to researchers. Advances in underwater robotics, artificial intelligence, and materials science will enable exploration of submarine wrecks at depths and in conditions that are currently impossible to reach. These explorations may reveal new information about lost submarines and provide closure for families who have wondered about the fate of their loved ones for generations. The history of submarine rescue operations is filled with heroic efforts, technological innovations, and heartbreaking failures that highlight both the courage of rescuers and the unforgiving nature of the deep ocean. When a submarine becomes trapped on the bottom, her crew faces a race against time as air supplies dwindle and hope fades. The rescue teams that respond to these emergencies must overcome crushing depths, dangerous weather, and technical challenges that push the limits of human engineering and endurance. These dramatic rescue attempts, whether successful or tragic, represent some of the most compelling stories in maritime history. The USS Squalus disaster of May 1939 marked a turning point in submarine rescue capabilities and demonstrated that men could be saved from submarines trapped on the ocean floor. The Squalus, a new fleet submarine conducting sea trials off the New Hampshire coast, suffered a catastrophic flooding accident when a faulty valve allowed seawater to flood her engine room. The submarine sank rapidly to a depth of 243 feet, trapping 59 crew members in compartments that had not been flooded by the initial accident. The rescue operation that followed became a model for future submarine rescue efforts and showcased the effectiveness of the newly developed McCann rescue chamber. This revolutionary device, designed by Lieutenant Commander Charles Swede Mumson, could be lowered to a sunken submarine and sealed over an escape hatch, allowing trapped crew members to be brought to the surface in small groups. The rescue chamber had never been used in an actual emergency, making the Squalus operation a real-world test of untried technology. Commander Charles Swede Mumson personally supervised the rescue operation, directing the complex process of positioning the rescue chamber over the Squalus's escape hatches. The operation required precise navigation and coordination between surface vessels, as the rescue chamber had to be lowered through 243 feet of water and aligned with submarine hatches that were only a few feet in diameter. Strong underwater currents and the submarine's position on a sloping bottom complicated the rescue effort. The first successful rescue dive brought 4 men to the surface, proving that the McCann chamber could work under actual emergency conditions. Over the following day, additional rescue dives brought more survivors to the surface, with rescuers working around the clock despite dangerous weather conditions. The operation ultimately saved 33 men from the Squalus, though 26 others had died in the initial flooding. The successful rescue demonstrated that submarine crews had a fighting chance of survival even when their vessel was lost on the ocean floor. The Soviet submarine rescue attempt that followed the loss of K-129 in 1968 illustrated the limitations of rescue technology when submarines sink in extremely deep water. The K-129 came to rest at a depth of more than 16,000 feet in the Pacific Ocean, far beyond the reach of any rescue equipment available at the time. Even if survivors had been trapped in air-filled compartments, no rescue system could have reached them at such depths. The Soviet Navy's rescue vessels could only search the surface for debris and survivors who might have escaped during the submarine's sinking. The Kursk rescue operation in 2000 became one of the most watched and controversial submarine rescue attempts in history, as international media coverage brought the drama into homes around the world. The massive nuclear submarine lay on the bottom of the Barents Sea at a depth of 354 feet within the theoretical reach of rescue equipment, but presenting unique challenges due to her size and the damage she had sustained. Russian rescue submersibles repeatedly attempted to dock with the Kursk's escape hatches, but were unable to establish a proper seal. International rescue teams offered assistance within hours of the Kursk accident, but Russian authorities initially rejected foreign help, insisting that their own capabilities were sufficient. The delay in accepting international assistance proved fatal to any survivors who might have been trapped inside the submarine. When British and Norwegian rescue teams finally gained access to the Kursk, they found that all crew members had died days earlier, highlighting the critical importance of rapid response in submarine rescue operations. The development of deep-sea rescue vehicles has been driven largely by submarine accidents and the need to reach greater depths with more reliable equipment. The Mystic-class deep-sea rescue vehicles, operated by the US Navy, can reach depths of up to 5,000 feet and transport up to 16 survivors per rescue dive. These vehicles incorporate lessons learned from decades of rescue operations and represent the current state of the art in submarine rescue technology. Atmospheric diving suits have provided another approach to submarine rescue, allowing individual divers to descend to depths that would be impossible with conventional diving equipment. These one-atmosphere suits maintain surface pressure around the diver while providing the mobility and dexterity needed for complex rescue operations. The suits can operate at depths of over 2,000 feet and have been used successfully in several submarine rescue operations and recovery efforts. The challenges of submarine rescue extend far beyond the technical difficulties of reaching trapped submarines. Medical considerations become critical as rescue operations can take many hours or days to complete, during which time trapped crew members may suffer from carbon dioxide poisoning, hypothermia, or injuries sustained during the submarine's accident. Rescue planners must balance the need for speed with the requirement for careful, methodical operations that do not endanger either the trapped crew or the rescue personnel. Weather conditions often complicate submarine rescue operations, as rescue vessels must maintain precise position over the submarine while deploying delicate rescue equipment. High seas, strong winds, and limited visibility can make rescue operations impossible or extremely dangerous. The rescue of the crew from the Soviet submarine S-80 in 1961 was delayed for several days by severe Arctic weather that prevented rescue vessels from approaching the accident site safely. International cooperation in submarine rescue has evolved significantly since the Cold War, with former adversaries now sharing rescue technologies and offering mutual assistance during emergencies. The Submarine Rescue Consortium, formed by several NATO nations, provides a coordinated response capability that can be deployed anywhere in the world within days of a submarine accident. This cooperation reflects the recognition that submarine crews face common dangers regardless of their nationality. Training for submarine rescue operations involves complex exercises that simulate the conditions rescuers will face during actual emergencies. Rescue personnel must be proficient in operating sophisticated equipment under extreme pressure and dangerous conditions, often while working in complete darkness or limited visibility. The psychological demands of rescue operations are enormous, as rescuers know that the lives of trapped submariners depend on their skill and courage. The future of submarine rescue technology will likely focus on autonomous systems that can operate more reliably in deep water and dangerous conditions. Remotely operated vehicles equipped with artificial intelligence systems could perform rescue operations without putting human rescuers at risk, while advanced life support systems might extend the survival time of trapped submarine crews. Research into emergency escape systems may also provide submarine crews with better options for self-rescue when their vessels are damaged or disabled. Despite advances in rescue technology and techniques, the fundamental challenge of submarine rescue remains unchanged. Time is always the enemy. Trapped submarine crews have limited air supplies and face constant dangers from flooding, fire, or toxic gases. Every rescue operation becomes a race against time, with rescuers working desperately to reach trapped submariners before it is too late. The heroic efforts of submarine rescue teams, whether successful or unsuccessful, represent some of the finest examples of human courage and dedication in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Even in our modern era of satellite surveillance, advanced sonar systems, and global communication networks, submarines continue to vanish without a trace, creating mysteries that challenge our understanding of what should be possible in the 21st century. These contemporary disappearances occur despite decades of safety improvements, sophisticated emergency systems, and international cooperation in submarine rescue operations. The ocean, it seems, still holds secrets that our technology cannot fully penetrate, and the submarines lost in recent years remind us that the sea remains as dangerous and unpredictable as it was in the earliest days of underwater warfare. The Argentine submarine Ara San Juan disappeared in November 2017 while returning to her base at Mar del Plata after a routine patrol mission. The German-built Dal 1700 class submarine carried 44 crew members, including Argentina's first female submarine officer, and was considered one of the most modern vessels in the Argentine Navy's fleet. The submarine's last communication reported a battery problem and indicated that she was continuing her journey on the surface, but no further messages were received despite multiple attempts by naval authorities to establish contact. The search for Ara San Juan became one of the largest international maritime rescue efforts in recent history, with ships and aircraft from more than a dozen countries participating in the operation. Advanced sonar systems, satellite imagery, and underwater detection equipment scoured thousands of square miles of the South Atlantic, but the submarine seemed to have vanished completely. The families of the missing crew members maintained vigil as search teams worked around the clock, hoping against hope that their loved ones might be found alive in a disabled but intact submarine.